You look at the map of the world right now and you tell me that what we are seeing from the United States is normal foreign policy. And I will tell you that you are living in a fantasy land because what we are witnessing is nothing short of a global shakedown. You have Donald Trump looking at Greenland not as a sovereign territory, not as the home of people with their own rights and history, but as a piece of real estate he can bully his way into acquiring. It is the logic of a gangster, not a president. He thinks he can threaten the Kingdom of Denmark. He thinks he can toss around words like invasion and military force against an ally, and that everyone is just going to roll over and give him what he wants because he is the big bad wolf. Well, I have got news for the chaos agents in Mar-a-Lago because they just ran face first into the one thing they do not know how to handle, and that is competence. You see Mark Carney standing there with the Prime Minister of Denmark, and you see what actual leadership looks like. It is not about tweeting threats at 3 a.m. It is about standing shoulder to shoulder with your allies and drawing a line in the sand that says, we are not going to be bullied and we are not going to be bought. When you compare the two sides of this fight, the contrast could not be starker if you painted it in black and white. On one side, you have the Trump regime acting like an organized crime syndicate, treating international borders like suggestion lines and sovereign nations like distressed assets waiting to be liquidated. They send out their people to go on television and talk about invading Greenland like it is a rational option on the table. It is insanity. It is dangerous. And frankly, it is embarrassing for anyone who cares about the dignity of democratic institutions. But then you look north and you see Canada stepping up as the adult in the room. Prime Minister Carney does not have to scream and shout to make his point. He shows up, he meets with Mette Frederiksen, he reaffirms that Canada and Denmark are partners in the Arctic and that the sovereignty of nations is not up for negotiation. That is how you project power. You do not project power by acting like a thug. You project power by showing that you are steady, you are serious, and you have the alliances to back it up. This is the front line of the new war for the Western Hemisphere. And do not kid yourself for a second thinking this is just about Greenland or just about some ice in the Arctic. This is a test. Donald Trump is testing the waters to see how far he can push the envelope of aggression before someone pushes back. He tried it with Ukraine, where he tried to extort Zelensky and turn a sovereign nation into a political pawn for his buddy Putin. And what did Carney do then? He met with Zelensky immediately. He gave him the state welcome he deserved. He made it crystal clear that Canada stands with Ukraine against Russian aggression and against American extortion. It is the same playbook every single time. Trump creates chaos and instability to serve his own ego and his own pocketbook, and serious leaders have to come in and clean up the mess. But this time, Canada is not just cleaning up the mess. Canada is leading the resistance. Canada is showing the rest of the world that you do not have to be afraid of the bully. You listen to the rhetoric coming out of the Trump camp, and it is all about dominance. It is all about submission. They want Denmark to hand over Greenland or else. They want to act like the Monroe Doctrine is a permission slip for modern-day piracy. But when you watch Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Frederiksen together, you see mutual respect, you see cooperation, you see two leaders who understand that the future is built on values, not on violence. They are talking about security in the Arctic. They are talking about the coalition of the willing. And they are talking about the rule of law. That is the language of free people. The garbage coming out of the Trump White House is the language of a protection racket. And the reason Canada is furious right now is because they see exactly what is at stake. If you let a guy like Trump start redrawing maps with a Sharpie and a threat, then nobody is safe. Not in Europe, not in the Arctic, and certainly not in Canada. This is why I keep telling you that this is about more than just politics. It is about the fundamental structure of how the world works. You have got the Trump-Putin axis of gangster fascism trying to dismantle the post-war order and turn everything into a transaction where the strong take what they want and the weak suffer what they must. And standing in the breach, you have Canada. You have a Canada that has decided it is not going to be a spectator in its own demise. It is going to be a player. It is going to be a leader. When Carney stands there and says Canada will always support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Denmark, he is sending a message that echoes a hell of a lot louder than any unhinged rant from a rally stage. He is saying that the free world still has a spine. And let me tell you something about bullies like Trump. They hate it when you have a spine. They rely on fear, they rely on confusion. But when they look at Canada right now, they do not see fear. They see resolve, and that terrifies them more than anything else. You have to understand the beast we are dealing with here, because if you try to analyze Donald Trump through the lens of traditional politics, you are going to miss the point every single time. This is not about Republican versus Democrat, and it is not about conservative versus liberal. What we are seeing is the rise of what Charlie Angus correctly calls global gangster fascism. That is the only phrase that fits. It is a criminal enterprise masquerading as a government. You look at what happened in Venezuela, and you tell me that was a foreign policy decision. It was a shakedown, pure and simple. Trump did not go in there to restore democracy or to help the people. He went in there to kidnap a foreign leader and seize the oil assets, because that is what gangsters do. They see something they want, they manufacture a reason to take it, and then they dare anyone to stop them. The administration tries to dress it up in all this high-minded language about securing borders and stopping drugs, but we know that is a load of garbage. How do we know? Because at the exact same time Trump was talking about fighting drug trafficking, he was pardoning the former head of Honduras who was convicted of flooding the United States with cocaine. You do not pardon a drug trafficker if you are fighting a drug war. You pardon him because he is part of the club. You pardon him to send a message to every other corrupt leader out there that if you play ball with the boss, you get protection. It is the logic of the mob. The message Trump sent with that Venezuela operation was not about justice. It was about dominance. He stood up and basically declared that American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. That is not the language of a president. That is the language of a Don asserting control over his territory. This is what they are calling the new doctrine, but it is really just an update on the old strongman tactics. They want you to believe this is some kind of 21st century manifest destiny, but it has nothing to do with destiny and everything to do with looting. Trump looks at a country like Venezuela, and he does not see a sovereign state. He sees a piggy bank he can smash open. And the terrifying part is that he thinks he can apply this same logic to our allies. He thinks he can look at Canada or Denmark and use the same threats, the same intimidation, and the same gangster tactics to get his way. He is telling the world that the United States has become a kleptocracy that will shake down whoever it wants, whenever it wants. When you strip away the flags and the podiums and the press briefings, what you are left with is a criminal state run by a man who has benefited from mob money and criminal ties his entire life. He is taking the business model of the Trump Organization, which was built on laundering money and stiffing contractors, and he is applying it to the United States government. He is treating the military like his personal enforcement arm and the State Department like his bag men. And for a long time, the media in this country just tiptoed around it. They were too afraid to call it what it was. They wanted to pretend this was normal, but you cannot pretend anymore. When you have a president who is openly talking about invading allies and seizing territory, you have crossed the Rubicon into gangster fascism. This is the reality that Canada is waking up to, and it is the reality that the rest of the world needs to confront fast. You cannot negotiate with a gangster, you can only stand up to him. Trump thinks that because he has the biggest stick, he can make up the rules as he goes along. He thinks he can redefine sovereignty to mean whatever he says it means. But he is making a massive miscalculation. He is assuming that everyone else is as corrupt and as cowardly as the sycophants he surrounds himself with. He is assuming that when he snaps his fingers, the world will jump. But he is finding out the hard way that when you try to shake down free people, they do not just hand over their lunch money, they fight back. And right now, we are seeing that fight take shape in a way that I do not think Donald Trump ever saw coming. He wanted to send a warning to the world, but all he did was wake up the resistance. Once you put the pieces of this gangster fascism puzzle together, you suddenly realize the level of threat sitting right on the northern border. You have to look back at the timeline because Donald Trump was setting a narrative of threat against Canada long before he even knew where Venezuela was on a map. It started with the lies about the border. He stood up there and told the American people that Canada was this massive fentanyl center that was killing thousands of Americans. He didn't just call it a drug problem, he explicitly described fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. Now, if you know anything about foreign policy, you know that weapon of mass destruction is coded language. It is the magic phrase that gives a U.S. regime the permission slip to go in and invade another country under the guise of national security. It was a setup from day one. You had Prime Minister Trudeau trying to do the rational thing. He tried to reassure the Americans. He tried to bring out the charts and the facts to show that the Canadian border was secure and that we were not flooding them with drugs. But it did not matter one bit because in the world of Trumpian politics, facts are irrelevant. It was about establishing a narrative. He needed an enemy and he needed a pretext. Then you had Kash Patel from the FBI ramping it up, talking about the need to protect the American border from the Canadian terrorist threat. He was out there talking about hundreds of terrorists pouring across the border, which was absolutely ridiculous, but it served the purpose. It poured gasoline on the fire. And then you had Christine Noem jumping into the fray, talking about the threat of the northern border bringing criminal gangs and El Salvadorian gangs into the U.S. from Canada. It was absurd. It was laughable, but it was dangerous. The tragedy here is the complete failure of the American media to call this what it was. You had the New York Times and the Washington Post and the talking heads on CNN just sitting there acting like this was normal discourse. They should have been screaming from the rooftops asking, "What the heck are you talking about?" regarding this imaginary threat from Canada. But they didn't. They let Trump establish this narrative of threat unchecked. And now you see the result. Trump is telling the world that he can go wherever he wants and take whatever he wants from any country under the pretext of a threat that he manufactured. He did it in Venezuela where the threat did not exist, and he is trying to do it in Canada where the threat does not exist. This is the playbook. They create a boogeyman, they scare the hell out of their base, and then they use that fear to justify a power grab that would make a dictator blush. It is a shakedown wrapped in a flag, and Canada is right in the crosshairs. But here is where the crack begins to appear in the facade. I want to zero in on this because it is the most important dynamic playing out right now. The crack is forming in the bombast and the arrogance and the sheer hubris that we saw in that press conference. You see, Donald Trump as a gangster only understands the shakedown. That is his entire worldview. He does not believe that America wins through negotiation or shared interests. He believes you only win by threat. And in doing so, he has completely abandoned America's most powerful tool, which was our ability to use immense diplomatic power to get what we wanted without firing a shot. Think about how this used to work. In the past, if there was friction, Canada would have bent over backwards to avoid an open confrontation with the United States. That is just the history of the relationship. The language would have been coded. It would have been polite. We would have done a diplomatic dance, and in the end, we probably would have compromised. But Donald Trump has taken that ability to compromise away from us. He torched it. He has ridiculed Canada. He has undermined us. He has laughed at us, and he thought he could just slap us around and we would take it. Well, Donald, let me tell you what you actually accomplished. You did not get submission. You got a wall of resistance. You look at the Canadian people right now, and the determination is unlike anything I've ever seen. To put it bluntly, they hate your guts, and they have decided that they will never, ever allow you to take anything from them. You cannot bully a people who have decided that their freedom is non-negotiable. You have made every single Canadian aware of the absolute necessity to resist. You stripped away the polite diplomatic fiction that allowed us to get along, and you replaced it with a raw fight for survival. And in a fight for survival, you do not compromise. He did the same thing with the rest of the world when he made a mockery of the Venezuela invasion. By ridiculing the notion that he went in there to restore democracy, because we all know he could not care less about democracy, he pulled the rug out from under the Western allies. He stripped them of the ability to paper over the problems. He made it impossible for them to pretend that there is a polite way to talk about this. He made it clear to everyone, this is a shakedown. And then you have Stephen Miller's wife posting that picture of Greenland plastered with the American flag with the caption soon. Do not think for a second that was a joke. That was a message. That was a direct threat sent straight to the heart of Europe. He was telling a NATO ally, guess what? I am coming for you next. He is forcing the Europeans into the exact same corner he put Canada in. They would have loved to bend themselves into pretzels to avoid a fight with the US, but now they have no choice. You either stand up or you roll over. That is the binary world of gangster politics. But I am betting that this hubris is the beginning of the end because you cannot fight the whole world at once, especially when you have given them no choice but to fight back. I am looking at the board and I am telling you that despite all the noise and all the threats, the United States is actually operating from a position of historical weakness. This is the paradox of the bully. They scream the loudest when they are the most isolated. And right now, America has no friends. It has no true allies. Donald Trump has managed to do in a few years what our enemies could not do in a century. He has alienated the entire continent of Africa, which is now pivoting hard toward Russian and Chinese influence. He has completely angered and alienated Latin America, treating them like a backyard to be exploited rather than a region of partners. He thinks he can push them around, but he is forgetting that the world is a big place and they have other options now. The signal he is sending is the most dangerous part of this entire equation. When he acts like a gangster, he is validating the gangster logic for every other autocrat on the planet. He is sending a message to China that says, hey, if we can shake down countries and ignore sovereignty, well, so can you. He is practically gift-wrapping Taiwan and handing it over because he has destroyed the moral and legal argument against annexation. He is sending a message to Putin to do whatever he wants. He is dismantling the international rules that kept the peace and replacing them with the law of the jungle. And in the jungle, you are only safe as long as you are the biggest beast. And America is rapidly losing that status because it is rotting from the inside out. He is telling the rest of the world that either we stand together at this time or we are going to be broken one by one. And I do not think the world is going to break. I think this is the pivotal moment where the fence-sitters have to pick a side. It is no longer possible to sit on the sidelines. It is no longer possible to be in the middle of the road, hemming and hawing and hoping for the best. That middle ground has been scorched. You have to realize that this is exactly what it looks like, a gangster fascist threat that respects no borders and no laws. If you are a leader in Europe or Asia or South America, you are looking at this and realizing that appeasement is a death sentence. You have to stand up because if you do not, you are next on the menu. And this brings us to the moment where the rubber meets the road, where the theory ends and the hard reality of history begins. It is up to us as Canadians to resist, and I know we will because we have been here before in a different time and against a different darkness, but the spirit is exactly the same. You cannot talk about this moment without looking back at history and understanding the role that this country has played when the chips were down. I want to take you back to 1941, to the darkest moments of the Second World War when the world was teetering on the edge of the abyss. Winston Churchill looked across the Atlantic and he did not just see a colony and he did not just see a polite neighbor. He saw the future. He said, Canada is the linchpin. I am really struck by that word, linchpin. It is the piece that holds the wheel on the axle. Without it, the whole thing comes off and crashes into the ditch. Churchill said that Canada is the linchpin of the English-speaking world. He said that Canada, whose relations of friendly, affectionate intimacy with the United States on the one hand, and her unswerving fidelity to the Commonwealth on the other, is the link which joins together the great branches of the human family. He saw Canada as the bridge. He saw us as the link spanning the oceans, bringing the continents into their true relation, preventing the growth of division between the proud nations of Europe and the New World. But look at where we are today. That quote sends a shiver down my spine because the threat that is here to break us apart is not coming from across the ocean. It is coming from right next door. The geography has not changed, but the geopolitical reality has been turned on its head, and yet Canada remains the linchpin. We remain the front lines. We remain the voice of resistance. When the United States, or at least the regime currently occupying the White House, decides to go rogue, it falls to Canada to hold the line for the rest of the democratic world. It is not going to be easy, my friends. Nobody is saying this is going to be a walk in the park. But I want to assure you that if we keep doing what we are doing, we are going to win this fight. I urge Prime Minister Carney to start moving on this volunteer force of civilians. We need to build that up. We need to stop talking about preparedness and start building the infrastructure of resilience. You look at the Europeans and they understand the game now. They know they are going to work with Canada, not because we are nice, but because we are the only ones left standing in the doorway, blocking the chaos from sweeping the whole house. We are the linchpin that holds the alliance together while the United States tries to tear it apart. And we will not break, not now, not ever, because we are the true North strong and free, and we will always be true North strong and free. This fight is happening on the ground, and it is happening right now in your communities. If you want to know what you can do, you need to look at what is happening in Edmonton and Calgary because the resistance is going on tour. On January 16th in Edmonton, we have got some details for you. This is going to be at the Bison Lodge, the Old Timers Cabin at the Nellie McClung Park. Now, this is going to be a bit of a different thing because trying to organize two Midas town halls was pretty difficult on such short notice, but we really felt it was important to be in Alberta this time. Alberta is the heartland of this fight in so many ways. So in Edmonton, I am going to be doing it with my colleague, the MP for Edmonton, Strathcona, Heather McPherson. I will be appearing with her, and she is going to be organizing it with her team, and it is going to be her event. But I will be there, and we are inviting the mighty Midas out to support and to hear the latest in the fight of resistance. You have to show up. You cannot just click like and think you have done your job. You have to be in the room. You have to look your neighbors in the eye and realize you are not alone in this. Then on January 17th, we will be in Calgary. We are still waiting on the final details, just getting the last logistics sorted, but we will get that information to you as soon as we have it. Mark your calendars. January 16th, Edmonton Bison Lodge, Nellie McClung Park. January 17th, Calgary. We will get you that information soon. This is how you build a movement. You build it room by room, town by town, person by person, until the message is so loud that even the deafest ears in Washington cannot ignore it. I want to leave you with a thought that has kept me going through a lot of dark nights. Keep kicking in the darkness, my friends. It will bleed daylight. That is the only way out of this. You do not wait for the sun to rise. You kick at the darkness until it breaks. You fight for the light. Thank you, Merci and Miigwech. Well, there you have it, folks. This is the reality we are living in, and this is the fight we are called to. So I have to ask you, are you ready to be the linchpin that history demands, or are you going to let the wheel come off? Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit subscribe to help us get to 6 million subscribers. And if you want to stay plugged into the resistance, become a subscriber to our Substack at MidasPlus.com for daily recaps and ad-free episodes.